In 1914, attempting to cross Antarctica meant stepping off the edge of the known world. There was no GPS, no radio communication, and absolutely no chance of a helicopter rescue if things went wrong. The plan for the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition was to sail down to the Weddell Sea, disembark, and march 1,800 miles straight through the center of the frozen continent. The man commanding this expedition was Sir Ernest Shackleton. When the crew reached the final whaling station before Antarctica, the local whalers explicitly warned them that the sea ice was unusually thick and dangerous. Shackleton ignored them and ordered his ship forward anyway. By January 1915, the Weddell Sea lived up to its deadly reputation. The expedition's ship, the Endurance, became locked solid in the dense pack ice. They were stranded miles from the coastline, completely paralyzed. The Weddell Sea is a trap where frozen layers pile up and compress. Over the next 9 months, millions of tons of freezing pressure squeezed the sides of the Endurance, eventually buckling the heavy wooden beams and splintering the hull. Freezing water poured into the lower decks. Shackleton gave the order to abandon ship, and shortly after, the Endurance slipped beneath the ice to the bottom of the ocean. The objective of crossing Antarctica died with it. 28 men were now stranded on a drifting sheet of ice in total darkness. With no ship and winter setting in, the original mission was over. The only goal now was surviving a landscape that offered zero resources and zero mercy. Shackleton had to ruthlessly strip away the past to ensure their future. He instituted a strict 2-pound weight limit for everything dragged across the ice. To prove his point, he dropped his own gold coins and a gold watch directly into the snow. Sentimentality was dead weight. There was exactly one exception to the rule. Shackleton allowed the expedition's photographer, Frank Hurley, to save a heavy camera and about 150 glass negatives. That equipment is the only reason we have physical proof this ordeal actually happened. As food rations dwindled to single biscuits and small pieces of meat, Shackleton actively managed his crew's psychology. He assigned daily, arbitrary tasks to keep the men busy and offset depression. He deliberately lied to them about the true scarcity of their food to prevent panic from setting in. This vintage map of the Weddell Sea quadrant shows how the geography actively worked against them. The ice floe they had camped on caught the ocean currents. They were drifting further and further away from the solid land of the Antarctic Peninsula, moving blindly toward the open ocean. They abandoned their makeshift camp, loaded into 3 small lifeboats, and rowed fiercely toward a tiny speck on the map called Elephant Island. After nearly 500 days stranded on the drifting ice, the men finally felt solid ground beneath their boots. But Elephant Island was completely desolate, a remote, unvisited rock with no rescue supplies and zero chance of a passing ship. Standing on solid ground didn't mean they were saved. It meant they were marooned. Without another extreme, immediate pivot, they had simply found a steady place to starve to death. Shackleton made a desperate calculation. He would leave 22 men behind to wait, while he and a crew of 5 took one of the small lifeboats and aimed for a whaling station on South Georgia Island, 800 miles northeast. To get there, they had to cross the Drake Passage. This is the most dangerous stretch of ocean on the planet, where ocean currents converge to create massive 40-foot waves and hurricane-force winds that routinely destroy large, modern steel ships. Shackleton's crew faced those massive waves in a tiny, hand-powered wooden rowboat. For over 2 weeks, they rowed in 4-hour shifts, constantly bailing freezing water out of the hull just to keep from sinking. Against all odds, they survived a massive storm and struck the coast of South Georgia Island. But their map showed a final, brutal problem. They had landed on the uninhabited side. Between them and the whaling station stood a wall of jagged, vertical glaciers that no human had ever crossed. The boat was too damaged to sail around the island, so Shackleton and 2 of his men tied themselves together with a rope. Without any climbing gear, without any tents or sleeping bags, they hacked steps into the solid ice and climbed blindly through the 10,000-foot peaks for 36 hours straight. When every piece of technology, shelter, and reliable geography failed, human willpower had to stretch to cover the deficit. They turned an impossible mountain crossing into a path to salvation. When the three men finally stumbled into the whaling station, the factory manager didn't know what he was looking at. Their clothes were shredded, their faces black with soot and frostbite. They looked like ghosts returning from an expedition that the world assumed had perished 2 years earlier. Back on Elephant Island, the other 22 men had spent 4 months huddling under overturned boats. Their appointed leader, Frank Wild, kept them from falling apart by anchoring them to a single routine. Every morning, he looked out at the empty sea and told the men, "Pack your bags, boys, the boss is coming." And he did. After 3 failed rescue attempts blocked by ice, Shackleton finally broke through on a borrowed Chilean ship. He counted the figures on the shore. Every single one of the 28 men who set out on the Endurance survived. Shackleton's original plan to cross the continent ended before his crew even stepped on land. He failed every geographical objective of the mission, but he brought back every single man alive. In 2022, searchers sent submersibles down into the Weddell Sea and found the Endurance. It sits 10,000 feet below the surface, perfectly preserved by the cold, marking the exact spot where the original mission sank. The survival of the Endurance crew is a study in what happens when a leader stops fighting for a dead plan. By the time they reached home, they had survived 2 years in the ice because they treated every new catastrophe as the new baseline for survival.